Hi, everyone. Rosanna Berardi and Jennifer Boehm here from Berardi Immigration Law and Barclay Damon. Thanks for joining us. We'll get started in just another minute or so. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar on Immigration Insights. We will get started shortly. Okay, let's get started. Thank you for attending the Berardi Immigration Law and Barclay Damon. Sorry, just having some audio issues. We'll be back in just a minute. Okay, sorry about that. We will get going. So again, I'm Rosanna Berardi, managing partner at Berardi Immigration Law.
I'm Jennifer Boehm, a partner with Berardi Immigration Law.
We are also co-counsel at Barclay Damon. That means that we handle immigration matters for the Barclay Damon law firm. If it seems like we're talking oddly, there's a delay after we speak. So I apologize for that. So anyway, let's get started. We know this is your lunch hour. We're really fortunate that you joined. So, Jen, how are you feeling after Inauguration Day on Monday?
It's been a wild 48 hours now. Trump signed a lot of executive orders, many which impact immigration. But Rosanna, before we dive into those executive orders, can you give our listeners a little bit of background about our U.S. immigration system and how our three branches of government are tied to many immigration initiatives and these executive orders that we're about to unpack?
Sure. So this is a great place to start. It seems a little rudimentary. It seems like you're back in fifth grade, but remember, there's three branches of government. There's executive, there's legislative, and there's judicial. And just remember, the executive branch is not in charge of making the law. Now, why do we have these things called executive orders? They've been around forever. Really, the Obama administration really started utilizing them back in the day to influence policies on a lot of areas of law because Congress refuses to act. So, what we saw on Monday night was a bit concerning for our democracy, in which a president had the power to just sign away, try to change the U.S. Constitution, tried to change the Immigration and Nationality Act. It doesn't matter what you think politically, just purely from a government perspective. This is a bit dangerous in that we have checks and balances in our system that allows us to change things the right way through Congress. So what we saw is not completely extraordinary, but just the volume that we saw was slightly concerning.
We never want to let Congress off the hook for making laws and reaching bipartisan decisions, right? We don't want to place that power directly in the hands of one decision maker, that being our president. So let's dive into a little bit of those executive orders and what we saw on the immigration side. There were about 10 that had direct impact to immigration. And we know that President Trump campaigned very heavily on this issue. So let's start off with the orders that impacted border security and enforcement, and particularly the southern border. Rosanna, can you tell us and give us the broad strokes, high-level overview of what those executive orders are purporting to do with respect to migrants coming in?
Right. So we knew there was going to be some attention based on the southern border, just given the migrant crisis of the last few years. So the first thing the president did was declare a state of emergency. And, that sounds like really inflammatory. And oh my goodness, most of the time that's done solely for budgetary and finance purposes. Once the government declares a state of emergency, they have access to federal funds and state funds. So definitely is a glimpse into what the Trump administration plans to do regarding border security, how they're going to handle it. They will probably bring in some federal forces, some military. Now, the military is used at the border pretty regularly, but this was a big statement about this administration is not going to let a porous border continue.
That's right. We even saw the use of the word invasion, and I'm sure there was a little bit of deliberate rhetorical use of that to, really try and emphasize that this administration is seeing migration as almost a threat. There's a lot of military engagement, and it's interesting to see how that's being framed in these executive orders. What are some of the immediate action with respect to those orders that we saw impacting those who are actively attempting to cross the border? Can you tell us a little bit about those specifics?
Yeah, so the Biden administration at the tail end of the term created something called CBP-1, and it was actually an app that it asked migrants to use when crossing the border in order to schedule appointments with the government. Kind of controversial, but it was rolled out very quietly. And that app was immediately shut down on Inauguration Day. So going forward, it's not being able to be utilized. And more importantly, there are thousands of people that had appointments scheduled in March and April and May. Those appointments are just clearly gone. So we're not sure what's going to replace it, if anything. There has been a lot of talk of doing asylum hearings right at the border. Something has to be done in the asylum system. Political asylum is perfectly fine way and legitimate way of entering the United States, but it should not take 5 years to make the determination. I always joke that if this was put in the hands of a private company or contractor, this would be moving and grooving quickly without waiting 5 or 6 years for a hearing. So I think we're going to see with the dismantling of the CBP-1 app, we're definitely going to see a change in how asylum is handled. But just remember, the law, the fundamental law, has to be changed by Congress. And we'll see what happens going forward.
Do you have any thoughts on Trump's reinstatement of the Remain in Mexico policy, which now requires those asylum seekers to wait in Mexico or anywhere outside of the US while they're going through their application processing? I recall we saw this during the first Trump administration. So what do we expect this time around?
Yeah, so this one, they brought it back from the first administration. During that time, it got bounced around a lot of the courts. Ultimately, the concept is, look, if you want to come to the US and apply for political asylum, that's great, but we don't want you in the US waiting 5 years. So you have to remain in Mexico. Now, the Mexican authorities not happy with this. They said this was a unilateral decision. They did not agree to it. I think there's some fundamental legal issues there that need to be resolved. Yeah. But they turned that one on immediately, to no one's surprise, because one of the major criticisms of Americans is that, look, we don't mind people coming in, but it's the volume and it's the length of time and the chaos that's involved with their entry. So we're going to see this one go back and forth. It might go all the way up to the Supreme Court, but for now, it's definitely in play.
That's right. And another group of people who are also outside of the United States, tell me about refugees and how we see the executive order impacting refugees. And for our listeners, can you give a quick high-level explanation of the difference between refugees and migrants on the southern border?
Okay, if I could go on TV and have this, going on the ticker 24/7, I would. There's a huge difference, you guys, between refugees and migrants. Refugees are individuals in Afghanistan, in war-torn countries, that plead to the U.S. government and say, we can't stay here. It's not safe. The application's made actually in their home country and is vetted through super high levels of U.S. Department of State, the UN High Commission on Refugees. These are individuals that the government vets on many, many levels, brings them to the United States, gives them work permits. They are following the law and the rules. Migrants are not the same. Migrants are people that show up at the border and say, hey, look, I'm afraid to go back home. There's no vetting. There's no really government interaction. And so those two things are very distinct. We want refugees in the United States because they are vetted and through a lot of layers of security. They bring a lot of economic benefit. Here in Buffalo, New York, there's a huge Burmese refugee population. And the refugee program was suspended by the Trump administration on Monday. They did this the first time around. I really think it conflates the issue of illegal immigration. I think we're picking on the wrong people here. We have always been a bastion of safety for people that are afraid to go back to their home countries. And the very definition of refugee reflects that. Now, this is not thousands, hundreds of thousands of migrants just running the border. This is very different, but that program's been suspended. And I think, again, it conflates the issue and is going to be, really just too bad for people that, their family members are fighting for U.S. services and they're trying to get out of Afghanistan. They're not going to be able to.
Similarly, so that's a suspension of a program of individuals who are outside of the United States, waiting, doing everything through a lawful pathway. Through the executive orders, Trump has also ended humanitarian parole programs, which also impact over 500,000 individuals in the United States from Cuba, Haiti, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. Tell us a little bit about that and how just any general American and our society as a whole may feel the impact of ending those parole programs.
So parole sounds like a criminal action, which in our world and in our industry, parole is a way of the U.S. government allowing someone in when they don't have the right documents. And humanitarian parole is a way of letting someone come in on a humanitarian basis, whether it is for health or safety or what have you. And the parole part is letting them in without the proper channels, if you will. Shutting that door down could have a huge impact on the U.S. economy. No one wants to talk about this. It's very unpopular, but a lot of humanitarian parolees are working in agriculture. They're working in jobs that Americans can't or won't do. And by closing the door on that, we're going to see an economic boomerang. Now, you can argue all day Americans should be doing this, should. They're not. There are labor gaps, particularly in agriculture, in farming. We see it in tech, we see it in medicine. There are simply not enough Americans to do it. And a lot of these programs were designed to supplement that type of labor. So by shutting the door on it, we're definitely going to see a boomerang effect.
Without a doubt. And oftentimes a question that comes up from these sorts of conversations is, well, why don't these individuals go and do it the right way? Why don't they apply for a working visa? Can you shed some insight into our processes and visa options that we do have and explain why it's so difficult to pursue that?
So everyone listening should feel really bad for Jen and I because we have the worst product to sell, which is called the U.S. Immigration and Nationality Act. The last time it was meaningfully updated was in 1996. So we're going on about 30 years. Okay. What's changed? Executive orders. The law is old, it's outdated, and it doesn't reflect how we work. Why don't people come in lawfully? Because it is near impossible. The way the law is in existence today favors high level thinkers and professionals. Nothing wrong with that at all, but has not moved with the times with respect to what our economy needs. There's no guest worker program. It is incredibly hard and difficult. That's why there's so many immigration lawyers out there, because it is incredibly difficult for someone to come in and do this lawfully. We are a system of sponsorship, meaning that you either have to be sponsored by an immediate family member, mother, father, child, or an employer. And the employment sponsorship really occurs at the high level, saying, okay, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they need a software developer. They're going to sponsor someone from India or from Greece or from Mexico to work. So doing it legally, very, very difficult.
That's right. And employment-based immigration options, in our grand scheme of things, the number of visas and the number of green cards that the government does give out and approve is like a very small sliver of pie when you look at our entire system. So it's frustrating to us as immigration practitioners when we're arguing for comprehensive immigration reform. It feels like an impossible task, and has proven to be an impossible task for Congress to handle, because it's such a robust and complex book of laws. We'd really be doing ourselves much more of a favor if we were able to slice it up and maybe tackle employment-based immigration options. Let's improve upon that system. Guest worker programs for the agricultural industries, for hospitality industries, let's improve that. Let's take a look at our southern border and asylum and refugee processes and improve that, rather than trying to take everything in one complete book and making a change.
Yeah, the comprehensive part is near impossible. Just think about this for 1 minute. In almost 30 years,
right,
doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican, no session of Congress has changed the U.S. Immigration and Nationality Act. That's alarming. And what's even more alarming is the use of these executive orders trying to dismantle the law and Constitution. So I'm excited about Congress. However, I am very realistic, because in 30 years, nothing's happened. Maybe when it does, I'll retire. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But, Jen, I think before we let everyone go, a really big one that's been all over the news right now is birthright citizenship. And under the 14th Amendment, it says there's a concept. It's known as jus soli. Soli means of the soil. If you're born in the United States, it does not matter who you're born to. You're automatically a U.S. citizen. This goes back to the U.S. Constitution in the 1800s. President Trump, interestingly, signed an executive order terminating it, effective at the end of February. And what happened yesterday, Jen? 22 states, the ACLU are all challenging it.
That's right.
Do we think this one is going to go into effect? I'm going to bet no. And if it does, we should be concerned for America, because changing the Constitution usually requires a constitutional amendment, a body of Congress behind it. We can't just go willy-nilly and pick things we don't like. And again, somebody on X said the immigration house is on fire and we're worried about the curtains. Birthright citizenship is not something that is a major problem. Yes, it is a problem of sorts, but of all the things that's wrong with the Immigration and Nationality Act, this is a really small slice of it. And we think that one's going to go away. So if anyone knows me, they know I only do things for 20 minutes. So we're just about at the 20-minute mark. We thank you for joining us. We know this was really vague. It was vague intentionally. So much came out in the last 48 hours. We're going to be drilling these down. We're going to be watching the lawsuits. Just remember, 3 branches of government in the US. Right now, we're seeing the executive branch do something they have no business doing. We've seen it before. We'll see it again. But the judiciary branch is going to be very active, whether it's at the district level or at the US Supreme Court level. They're going to be super active in the checks and balances. So I keep telling everyone, I've done a lot of interviews lately, zoom out, big picture. We've got checks and balances, and that's exactly why we have them. So we don't find ourselves in a position where somebody's just signing all of our constitutional rights away. So very difficult. Thank you for joining us. Please follow us on our blog. We're all over social media. We're with Berardi Immigration Law and Barclay Damon. And thank you to my partner, to Jennifer Bain, for being such a great moderator and co-host.
Thanks for tuning in.